And even within the Imamiyya, it is the transmission of Kitab Sulaym bin Qais is something that has been heavily and massively discredited. So I think the next book that we can go to is Rijal ibn al-Ghadairi.
That's it.
Because this book is extremely clear.
Rijal Ghadairi is one of our famous works of Rijal from the scholars of our Qudama, right? So it's one of our greatest scholars of Rijal.
Right. Al-Allama Ahmad ibn al-Husayn ibn Ubaidillah ibn al-Ghadairi is a classical Shi'i 12-verse scholar of Ilm al-Rijal, from among the most formidable experts and authorities in the field of Ilm al-Rijal. And what you see on the screen is his book Al-Rijal ibn al-Ghadairi. This has been edited by Sayyid Muhammad Rida al-Hussein al-Jalali, who himself is an authority in Ilm al-Rijal, one of the distinguished scholars of Ilm al-Rijal in the modern period.
And so now, just to say, we've actually got this, has been translated as well now, Rijal Ghadairi. It's actually on the, mashallah, some Shia researchers have put up a website of
Thaqalain. Yes.
Done great work. I know the brother who runs it, mashallah, research brother, good brother, muhakkik. He's translated this and put it up on his website. So if someone wants to check your reference that you give, they should be, inshallah, be able to find it there as well.
True. Yeah. So if you come to this edition, this is Rijal ibn al-Ghadairi. It's the Darul Hadith edition, published in Qum. It's the first edition, and it came out in 1422 AH. If you look at page 63, you see his entry in Sin, Sulaym bin Qais al-Hilali al-Amiri. This is what Ibn al-Ghadairi has to say. Remember, Ibn al-Ghadairi is considered to be the foremost and the most reliable authority in Ilm al-Rijal by Sayyid Sistani, and we can show proof of that later on. So Sulaym bin Qais al-Hilali al-Amiri, he reported from Amir al-Mu'mineen, from Al-Hasan, Al-Husayn, and Ali ibn al-Husayn. وَيُنْسَبُ إِلَيْهِ هَذَا الْكِتَابُ الْمَشْهُورِ. He is the one to whom the famous book, Kitab Sulaym, is attributed to. Now listen to this. He says, وَكَانَ أَصْحَابُنَا يَقُولُونَ. Our scholars used to say, إِنَّ سُلَيْمًا لَا يُعْرَفْ. That Sulaym is an unknown person. وَلَا ذُكِرَ فِي خَبَرٍ. He has not been mentioned in any report. So there used to be Shia scholars in the time of Al-Allama ibn al-Ghadairi who used to doubt the very existence of Sulaym bin Qais. But Allama ibn al-Ghadairi does not accept that. He says, وَقَدْ وَجَدْتُ ذِكْرَهُ فِي مَوَاضِعَ مِنْ غَيْرِ جِهَةِ كِتَابِهِ. He says, no, I've actually found mention of him in places other than his book.
Okay.
وَلَا مِنْ رِوَايَةِ أَبَانِ ibn Abi Ayyash anhu. And I have found his name in reports where it's not only Aban ibn Abi Ayyash who is reporting from him. So basically he's trying to refute the claim that Sulaym bin Qais was not a real historical figure, and that his book, Kitab Sulaym, is the only place where he's mentioned. Allama ibn al-Ghadairi says, no, I don't accept that. I have seen mention of him in other independent reports. So we can accept that Sulaym bin Qais al-Hilali was a real person. He was a historical figure. But then, وَقَدْ ذَكَرَ لَهُ ابن عقدة في رجال أمير المؤمنين أحاديث عنه. Ibn Uqda, the famous scholar, Zaydi scholar, has mentioned in his book Rijal Amir al-Mu'mineen certain narrations from Sulaym bin Qais. But now come to the main part. Al-Allama ibn al-Ghadairi says, وَالْكِتَابُ مَوْضُوعٌ لَا مِرْيَةَ فِيهِ. He says the book, Kitab Sulaym bin Qais al-Hilali, مَوْضُوعٌ, it is fabricated, it is a forgery, it is a fake invention. لَا مِرْيَةَ فِيهِ. And he says this is not just a theory that I'm putting forward or some kind of guesswork or speculation, or he says la miryata fihi. There can be no doubt about the fact that Kitab Sulaym bin Qais is a fabrication, it is an invention. So Sulaym bin Qais is a real historical figure according to Ibn al-Ghadairi. But this book is not a real book that's written by Sulaym bin Qais. This book is a fabrication. And then he says, وَعَلَى ذَلِكَ عَلَامَاتٌ. He says, I'm not just making an empty claim here. I can prove my claim. How do I know it's a fabrication? He says, عَلَى ذَلِكَ عَلَامَاتٌ فِيهِ تَدُلُّ عَلَى مَا ذَكَرْنَا. He says, open the book. of Sulaym bin Qais al-Hilali. Just open the book and read the narrations in it. I can give you examples of narrations that will leave you in no doubt about the fact that this book could only be fabricated by a ghali, or by a kind of crazy person who does not know basic, who's not familiar with basic realities and lacks common sense. So what kind of narrations is he talking about? He says, for example, there is a narration in Kitab Sulaym which mentions ما ذكر أن محمد بن أبي بكر وعظ أباه عند موته. There is a narration that talks about Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr giving maw'idha and speaking to his father at the time of his death. So at the time of Abu Bakr's death, Muhammad bin Abi Bakr was hardly 2 years old or 3 years old. A toddler would give maw'idha to his father at the time of death. That's something that's inconceivable. Yani only a madman would believe that, according to Ibn al-Ghadairi. And if you want, I can present a narration. It's mentioned in Kitab Sulaym from page 348 to 349. Basically, the narration talks about how Abu Bakr at the time of his death tells his son that, I can see Rasulullah, and I can see that I'm going to be put in hell, and there's going to be a chest that's made of fire, and I'm going to be entering it, and basically all kinds of, crazy ghali stuff in there, Rafidi stuff in there. The next thing that he says proves that Kitab Sulaym is a forgery and a fabrication is the narration in it that indicates that أن الأئمة ثلاثة عشر, that the Imams of Ahlul Bayt from the line of the Prophet are going to be 13. So basically, if you accept Kitab bin Sulaym, you have to accept that the Imams are 13, not 12. You can't be an Ithna Ashari then. If you're going to rely and if you're going to defend the authenticity of Kitab Sulaym, then you will have to accept that there are 13 Imams, because that's what the narration on page 380 of Kitab Sulaym, that's what it indicates. Because the Prophet tells Imam Ali alayhi salam that Allah is going to, Allah has chosen 12 Imams after us, after you and me. So basically, if there are 12 Imams after Imam Ali, then that means if you add Imam Ali, it becomes 13 Imams. So this is another reason why Ibn al-Ghadairi is saying that this book clearly is a forgery. It is not an authentic 12-verse Shia transmission. وَغَيْرُ ذَلِكَ. And there are other many narrations in it, which we can also present.
I'm gonna present a couple, yeah.
Yeah, which show you and which leave you in no doubt about the kind of crazy mindset that was behind the fabrication of this book.
So Sayyid, what we have here is that Rijal Ghadairi, Ibn Ghadairi, who's one of the foremost scholars of Rijal, who actually, for those of the viewers that might not know, we have some primary Rijal books, i.e. Rijal Najashi, Tusi, we have Rijal Keshi, and then we have Rijal Ghadairi and Barki as well. These are like the primary Rijal books, and actually in all of these Rijal books, generally the scholars that study Rijal, as you'll know, they generally give they generally prefer and give precedence to Rijal Najashi. That's generally the way it works. He gets folkier, but actually on the manhaj and the mabna of Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Husani Sistani, who's the current marja of the whole Shia world, basically one of the biggest of the Shia world today, and his mabna, Rijal Ghadairi has folkier over even Najashi.
Yes, and I will show you proof of that. I will because this is something that a lot of people don't know. I've seen even many of the scholars are not familiar with this basic point. I was looking at some papers on Ziyarat Ashura by some scholars associated with the Federation, and they were talking about how Kitab Ibn al-Ghadairi is, Rijal Ibn al-Ghadairi is not authentic because Sayyid al-Khuy could not find evidence of its authenticity. What they fail to mention is that Sayyid Sistani, after Sayyid al-Khuy, actually found the evidence of authenticity, and he authenticated Ibn al-Ghadairi, which means that Ziyarat Ashura goes back to being inauthentic, and in fact being the product of known fabricators, because Ibn al-Ghadairi has exposed some of the key fabricators in the chain of Ziyarat Ashura.
Okay, very good. So that's an additional point of it. So yeah, as in with Rijal Ghadairi, as you've highlighted, and that was the tarjuma of Sulaym, does he not also have a tarjuma of Aban in there as well?
Yes, he does. And inshallah,
about that, isn't it?
It is?
He says something similar about concept of it being fabricated there as well, doesn't he?
True. In fact, in Tarjuma of Aban ibn Abi Ayyash, he actually reveals the identity of the fabricator, basically.
Okay, according to his.
Yeah, let me show.
Because for those who don't know, Kitab Sulaym has been transmitted from Aban. He is the only sole transmitter from the top, right?
Yes, he's the primary transmitter. This is his name, Aban ibn Abi Ayyash.
Yes.
So this is also Rijal ibn al-Ghadairi. It's page 36 of the same edition, the Qum edition that I was quoting from. And it's the very first entry. The very first entry of Rijal ibn al-Ghadairi is Aban ibn Abi Ayyash.
Yeah.
And his name was Abi Ayyash Fayruz.
Yeah.
He was a tabi'i. He reported from Anas ibn Malik and also from Ali ibn al-Husayn alayhi salam. And as a narrator, he is da'if. Ibn al-Ghadairi says he's weak. La yultafatu ilayh. He says no attention should be paid to him or to anything that he transmits.
Okay.
And then he says وَيَنْسِبُ أَصْحَابُنَا وَضْعَ كِتَابْ سُلَيْم بِنْ قَيْسٍ إِلَيْهِ. He says our scholars attribute the fabrication and invention of Kitab Sulaym bin Qais to him. Yani according to our scholars, it was Aban ibn Abi Ayyash who fabricated this book and then falsely attributed it to Sulaym ibn Qais al-Hilali. In other words, Sulaym ibn Qais al-Hilali, that companion of Amir al-Mu'mineen, never knew this book. He had nothing to do with it. And it was this particular narrator, Aban ibn Abi Ayyash, this weak narrator, who invented it and then attributed it falsely to Sulaym ibn Qais al-Hilali.
And obviously, this is the research of Rijal Ghadairi and stuff. If you go deeper, where I don't know if you're going to mention later about Behbudi and stuff, the research actually gets even more advanced. Where it's actually like the research gets more advanced, as in, okay, Rijal Ghadairi mentions this, but there's other theories about actually who potentially could have fabricated Kitab Sulaym as well that go even beyond Aban Abi Ayyash. Am I correct?
True. When Sayyid Sistani's office tells you that his chain is highly problematic, it's basically problematic from beginning to end. Yani you look at the lower chain, you look at the upper chain, wherever you look at it, you cannot find any chain that is flawlessly authentic for the transmission of this book.
And once that chain is authenticated, as an example, if that chain was to be authenticated, that book doesn't have independent chains in it, meaning that one chain to that book and that's it. The whole book is one narrative. Then it's not in the book you have different chains like Al-Kafi, is it? It's once the chain is narrative, once the chain is authenticated, whole book is accepted. If the chain is not accepted, the whole book's not accepted.
Exactly. Yeah, the whole book.
It's not like Al-Kafi. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right. Yeah, because
it doesn't have individual chains inside it.
If you're able to find a correct chain to the book, then inside the book, almost all the chains are authentic.
Because it's the same chain.
Yeah, they're roughly the same. Yeah, in the sense that they're all trustworthy companions. Sometimes he's narrating from Ammar, sometimes from Miqdad, sometimes from Abu Dhar, sometimes from Salman, sometimes directly from Imam Ali, sometimes from Ibn Abbas. So
because these all companions that we think are thiqah anyway.
Right, and Sulaym himself is thiqah. He is trustworthy. So if you're able to find an authentic path,
actually said even on Sulaym, there's a bit of dispute that the authentication they bring from him is actually a more type of praise rather than a tawthiq. Don't they bring technically they get from Rijal Barki, don't they?
True.
There's the from Rijal Barki itself, which is another discussion anyway.
Right, but I'm speaking from the traditional perspective. So Sayyid al-Khuy, for example, has no issue with the wathaqa and trustworthiness of Sulaym bin Qais himself. But then he says the problem is we don't have any authentic path, any authentic chain for the transmission of Kitab Sulaym. So the Kitab Sulaym that we have in our hand today, even if we assume that it was written by Sulaym bin Qais and not fabricated by Aban bin Abi Ayyash, he says still, we cannot prove that this book that we have in our hands today is actually the book of Sulaym.
And with Sistani's research, so I think two things we should show. First thing we should show is where in Sistani's Mabna does he mention, or is it mentioned about him, that he prefers Rijal Ghadairi to every book, including Najashi?
Yeah, that is mentioned very clearly. It's mentioned on his website, and it's mentioned in a very important book about him that we will come to in a moment.